Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is finally about to drop after weeks of it being in its little demo phase, and it's another title that we can add to the ongoing list of modern video game remakes, aka one of the easiest $70 modern gaming companies are able to run out your pockets. Now, of course, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is kind of a step over a traditional remaster since, it expands on the original story, but from what I've heard and seen firsthand, Rebirth seems like a good-ass game, and it gives the original Final Fantasy source material a good tribute. Not to mention further solidifying the new age Tifa simp audience, Every good game's gotta have at least one of those out there. But even with everything seemingly going good for Square Enix's cash cow, you can't really ignore the fact that the game came out during a time where reviving game IPs from the yesteryear is the new industry cheat code, and mixed with the new live service microtransaction trend, it allows gamers to get farmed like prime RuneScape methods. So it's already a lot of stigma going against remakes and remasters, yet we still do have games like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth or Resident Evil 4 from a few months ago that seem to just wipe their nuts with those preconceived thoughts about this method of gaming. And I just can't be the only one that finds this type of thing happening interesting. I already talked about why remakes and remasters happen. Spoiler alert, Big Benny Franklin knows the exact reason why that is. But now I want to explore how a good remake is able to be made based on the remakes that I've played over the past few years that they've been trending in gaming, and what every remade game going forward should incorporate into their future titles. So hopefully after this video, if you don't already, you'll have a better understanding as to what actually makes a good remade game. So, by like standard definition of a remade video game, any game with this title definitely can't just, slack on being nothing more than a remaster in the sense of just updating the graphics. Graphics don't really impress anybody anymore, that was proven when the whole world was playing a shitty parkour game with stolen assets last year. A video game remake should not only have new graphics, but also an abundance of new gameplay features as well. At least enough content to justify that inflated price tag that the developers are going to argue that it's worth, no matter how delusional they are. Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth is obviously miles different from its low polygon counterpart, which, Square Enix didn't have to change the formula and switch up the graphics. They could have just remade the lower res gameplay into something more comparable to a modern title like Breath of the Wild, but they instead chose to bring this classic story into a light that appeals to a lot of newer gamers while still capturing the swag that people already associate with Final Fantasy. That and keeping the hate for the character Genesis alive after all these years, like that's peak generational hate. I do think there should be a balance between dope and unnecessary gameplay though. I have seen folks complain about Rebirth's inclusion of hella minigames that they don't really want to always play, so if an added feature potentially gets in the way of the overall intended experience in the game, then developers should be able to weigh in, what works and, what's annoying. However, the only thing arguably more important in most remakes than the gameplay itself is the story that these games are telling. Most remakes come from games that were originally story rich, so developers have the option of either keeping the remakes the same thing that we once had, or slightly switching up the story in a way that may or may not work. And I personally believe that most remakes should have some subtle changes to, just justify further myself playing the same game again. So my second point of advice is that a remake that does change the story slightly should do so in a way that makes sense. For example, in Mortal Kombat 11, 12, 1, whatever fucking timeline that we're on now. Even though the series does catch a lot of flack for rebooting the game every couple of years, I do find the story modes to be still enjoyable, as even if all the memorable characters and their scenarios within the story changes, at the end of the day, it still all makes sense, and it's easy to follow along with the gameplay minus the voice acting sometimes. Changing the source material that many of us associate with the power like nostalgia and making it good is one of the hardest things to do. So if a studio could find a way to capture the essence of the previous work while still, telling an adjusted storyline, then a remake will almost always work, in my opinion. And lastly, yet probably not the most important, but definitely a new generation problem I think that all remakes should address, is for studios to give the option to modernize control schemes and difficulty settings in these titles. Now, let me explain. Now, anybody that plays games with some years under their belt can probably remember the early gaming era, circa that PlayStation 1, 2, and original Xbox time period. And during that phase of gaming, we probably had the most unforgiving games. You see, back then, there wasn't really any room for advanced difficulty adjustment and developing, and control schemes more often than not were fucking terrible. Like, I hated being forced to use the PS1 analog button sometimes instead of the goddamn joystick. Like, why? However, that's not saying these games were still fun in their own ways, but to bring that level of primal controls into the modern age doesn't always translate well, at least to newer gamers. If Elden Ring in its prime showed us anything about gamers now compared to the classic age of gaming, it's that people are spoiled as hell. Plus, we have, really cool controllers and keyboards now, so frankly, it'd be kinda dumb for companies to not take advantage of the new control schemes. Obviously, the option for legacy controls should still be there, but there should also be the option to support a wide range of players. So, overall, that's what I think, what makes a good remade game, at least for right now. Unfortunately, we don't really see too many good IPs, compared to, like the early 2000s. So remasters are pretty much here to stay for the foreseeable future. So hopefully they all can incorporate these rules and make all the future remastered games live up to the hype. So what do you guys think about remastered games, and what makes a remaster pretty good? Feel free to comment down below. As always, like on the video, subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll see you on the next one.